All right. Yeah, thank you so much for organizing, like really very smooth organization. That's wonderful. I think I'm here to basically just set off the Joel Waldvogel panel. So this is work together with him before he takes on the main act. But overall, right, so what I'm trying to do is just kind of set the stage, I suppose, with this paper that we've been working on, just kind of provide a framework for detection, measurement, and welfare analysis of bias in general. So now, as we know, right, the DMA has been in effect for a while, and because of it, self-preferencing is now illegal. But part of what's kind of happened, or what it seemed like, is a little bit this situation where this regulation, is kind of ahead of research, right? We kind of need to understand how to detect and measure the welfare consequences of self-preferencing, but we don't quite know yet how to identify and measure this unwarranted self-preferencing. It's not entirely straightforward, right? So some basic questions that we're trying to at least provide a first answer for in this paper are, first of all, just what is self-preferencing? Secondly, how do we detect it? And finally, what is its welfare costs? All three of these aspects we think kind of matter in the situation. So just kind of a generic setup that we're having in mind here. Think about any time you go on a website, make it Amazon, make it Expedia or something else. You look for something. The example here is just hotels on Expedia, but that's just one simple motivating example where we have, well, users looking at these ranked lists of products and choosing among them. Now the platform actually gets to choose how to display this ranking, or which products to rank first versus last, and so on. And the way that the platform chooses this ranking is going to, well, try to serve some sort of objective. This objective can be something along making consumers happy, making sellers happy, or making the platform itself happy. Now, identifying or defining what self-preferencing is not easy. So what we're going to do, or what I'm going to try to do in this paper, in this presentation, is we'll kind of start with just one possible definition of self-preferencing. Later on, we'll talk about different definitions as well that could also play a role. So the definition that we'll go with for the next 15 minutes or so is that we're kind of thinking of this as the platform ranking its own products higher than whatever would maximize some combination, some weighted sum of seller and consumer surplus. So that's the very general setup. So we'll try to kind of give a framework for exactly that. Now, here's the roadmap. I'll talk a little bit about our framework, say how we can apply it to some ways to measure whether there is bias, and then finally measuring the welfare impacts as well. So starting with the model. So we'll start with basically just having two parts here in the model. First, we're going to have consumers who are going to choose among some ranked products. And very broadly, the higher the ranking of a product, the more likely they are to purchase that product. Then the second part of this model is going to have the platform. The platform is going to choose among a lot of possible rank orderings, and then things ensue. So the platform, though, the way that they're going to choose the ordering that we see at the end is going to have two dimensions as well. First, we're going to have them making a decision between how much to care about consumers versus the suppliers, the sellers. And then secondly, beyond how much to weigh the benefits to consumers versus suppliers, we're also going to think about how much they might want to advance their own objectives, their own interests at the expense of consumers and suppliers. Now, without self-preferencing, if they only care about consumers and suppliers and sellers, then the search ranking is going to lead to some sort of welfare frontier between maximum consumer surplus and maximum producer surplus. With platform self-preferencing or platform bias, these rankings are just going to depart from that frontier. And so one definition that we're proposing here is something where we say, essentially anything that gets us away from the frontier that is related to this platform dummy or something is going to end up being some sort of self-preferencing. Now, in order to implement any model here, first of all, we need to have some idea about how consumers make a choice, right? So somewhere here, we need a way to map or to translate the product characteristics, including prices, and also the platform chosen rankings into quantities, total revenue, consumer surplus, and so on for the choice set. So basically somewhere we need a demand model. There's many different ways to do this, search models, limited consideration sets, and so on. We want to keep it simple. So what we'll do is we'll just present something here in a logit framework, and I'll tell you where we have to think about things here. So on the consumer side then, what this means is that this consumer is going to choose among the J products that are presented to them. And they get their utility function from some rank independent mean utility, this delta J0, the 0 for rank independent, and then there's going to be a rank effect. Now I want to be very careful here because this utility, the way that we're thinking about this has, well, of course, the rank independent utility also in a way is going to vary by rank. Usually the platform puts the better products up higher. So we're kind of looking at this gamma times R term as a separate causal rank effect that affects the sales probability. And we're being a little potentially imprecise with the language along the lines of whether that actually affects utility, but we're thinking of it more as sales probability. Yeah, and then we have a mean utility and so on. With that, the main thing that I want to highlight here is just that these rankings, this capital R, or just the overall the rankings of each of these products, is they're going to affect stuff. They're going to affect the probability of purchasing a product because somewhere in there the sales share includes the e to the gamma times the ranking. And because of that, it's also going to affect producer surplus and consumer surplus. A quick note here that first of all, people might wonder, well, what about the sellers? Do they react to the rankings, the ranking algorithms, and so on? Well, so we have some evidence that shows not really. And still what we're doing is we're also kind of endogenizing the prices, and we'll show that, yeah, that's not really going to make a difference either. So with all of that said, now what's getting more interesting is the platform's ranking choice. Now, first of all, it is a big combinatoric problem, right? We have n factorial choices. It turns out even for small n factorial is a large number. So smart people have tried to set this up more clearly. We're going to more comprehensively. We're going to want to just keep it kind of simple again. So the way that we're thinking of it is, well, in a way, the platform can either maximize consumer surplus or maximize producer surplus or anything in between. So we're really just looking at the extremes, and the extremes are easier to think about. So first of all, if we wanted to only maximize consumer surplus, all we really have to do is just order things in descending order of their appeal, their rank independent utility, the delta 0. If we wanted to maximize producer surplus, well, then we should rank them in descending order of rank independent variable profit, P minus C times e to the delta 0. Now, yeah, and then the welfare frontier, where like once we have these 2 points, everything else in between we can model pretty simply. And yeah, so the welfare frontier is just any kind of weighted sum of those. A quick note here for exposition, I'm just going to continue now with assuming that the marginal cost is 0. But if we know the marginal cost, we just imagine them P minus NC anywhere where you see just a P. So the welfare frontier then looks like this, right? So first we can maximize revenue or producer surplus with the assumption of cost equals 0. And yeah, that's one point, or we can rank according to the e to the delta 0 to maximize consumer surplus. And the frontier is just defined by that weighted sum here with the kappas. The endpoints are pretty simple or pretty intuitive in this case. If kappa 1 and kappa 2 are equal to each other, we'll have a maximum, we have maximized producer surplus because we value price times delta, pretty much the same. And if the kappa 1 is equal to 0, then we have no weight on the price. That gives us consumer surplus. Now, what makes something be biased in this definition that we're proposing here is just if we, in addition to having these terms, this log of price and the delta 0, we also have this platform dummy DJ, and this psi term in here that may not be equal to 0. If it's not equal to 0, then basically that means that the platform products have a different value that, or get a different valuation, get a different weight than the non-platform products in the ranking decision. And whatever happens there, whenever that happens, we're not on the frontier anymore. We're somewhere inside of the frontier. You can see a little dot somewhere in the middle, right? Okay, so quick note here. I mentioned price adjustments by sellers. Not sure you can see it, but we have, there's 2 blue lines, 2 blue frontiers, pretty much on top of each other. One of them includes price adjustments and the other one does not. So yeah, with that said, now with this framework, especially what I want to have in mind here is this index function that you see here, the platform supply function. That's the thing that we're going to work with on motivating the bias tests. Now, these bias tests are generally known, but we wanted to kind of microfound them a little bit and really motivate them, especially in the sense with the background of the DMA as well. So one thing here, the first thing is we can have this conditioning on observables test, where basically we say, well, actually, I'll explain it in a moment anyway. So we have our index function over here. Now let's suppose that the index is cardinal and linear. Then yeah, what we'll have is we can just essentially plug in the rank as the dependent variable and estimate this thing, right? So the rank is going to be a function of the price and also this rank independent utility and this platform dummy here, right? Now that's pretty simple to do. If the coefficient on the platform dummy is not equal to 0, then we have bias. This is what we call the conditioning on observable approach, but you can already see, of course, this rank independent utility is really hard to observe, so we have to do something else. The thing that we'll do, oh, I see what happened, okay. Yeah, so normally we don't observe the delta J0, so instead what we'll do is we'll just regress the ranks on a bunch of controls that ideally approximate the rank independent utility really well, right? So we have a bunch of terms X in there, that we can work with here. Now, this regression works really well if the X's control for all of the effects on demand, right? But of course, what can happen is that if the X's don't capture everything that makes the Amazon Basics products different from the non-Amazon Basics products, then the error term is still correlated with the platform dummy, the variable that we really care about. Now, all of a sudden, we measure bias with bias. Not great, right? So the alternative or an alternative approach is the outcome-based approach. Now here we can think, okay, so we can suppose that the platform and non-platform products both have the same index value I. Now, if the term, the psi term is equal to 0, that means they have the same quality. But if the psi delta term is not equal to 0, they don't have the same quality, right? Then if the psi times delta term is yeah, well, basically, yeah, that's basically the thing that puts the platform products higher if beyond what their actual internal, what their intrinsic quality is. So then, yeah, at the same rank, basically the platform products are going to be worse. We can estimate this as well. We can just solve this equation for delta J0, put that on the left-hand side, and approximate the rank independent utility just with some outcome that we observe, something like quantity sold and so on. And we can estimate that. In that turn, the psi times delta term again tells us whether there is a bias or not. Yeah, so if that psi term is negative, then this suggests there's platform self-referencing. So now we can also put this all, right? So I've basically presented these two different ways to measure whether there is platform bias. We can implement them. Now, very generally, there's a couple of ways to do this, right? So in general, no matter what, we'll need information on the rankings. We'll need information on which products are the platform products or the potentially biased products or potentially preferred products. Now, and for the conditioning on observables approach, we also need a bunch of characteristics that legitimately predict what somebody's rank or quality really is. We don't need that for the outcome-based test. But for the outcome-based test, we need this other very large data requirement, which is the actual outcomes. We don't always observe them, right? So there's a little bit of a horse race given the, the data requirements, but then also we kind of need to see what actually, how accurate these are and in what situations they are more versus less accurate. In addition, of course, for the welfare analysis, we need more. We need all of the above, plus a causal rank effect. That's an additional requirement that also puts a little bit of stress on this. Now we have a couple of illustrations just to kind of show, how well these models might work. So we have a couple of illustrations. One is with the Amazon Kindle Daily Deals data. We also have some Expedia hotel searches data, and we have some Spotify New Music Friday data. So we're using all of these, but just as illustrations. So I'm not going to go into detail on these. The only reason why the Amazon Kindle daily deals is in black and the others are in gray is because we'll also do the welfare analysis as an illustration later. Now, all of these settings have a little bit of an issue in terms of either of data or in terms of not really having a setting for self-preferencing. So I'll make these caveats as we move on as well. So first of all, we're just kind of going to compare the conditioning and observables on the first column and the outcome-based tests. Here for Amazon, what we see, Kindle daily deals, it's a list of ebooks that are offered for a good deal every day. These lists vary, and we can see which products of these are published by Amazon versus not. And so what we see here is that the products that are published by Amazon, in both cases, one in the first column, have a better ranking, a lower ranking is better. That's the conditioning and observables test, but they also, conditioning on where they are ranked, they sell less. Both of these things indicate that there is self-preferencing. Now, again, a little caveat, it's an illustration. There are data issues that I'm happy to talk about in offline. We also have this for Expedia. There we see the same similar things. We thought maybe chain hotels might be either preferenced or not. It turns out these coefficients are generally smaller, but we find in general there's maybe a slight bias against chain hotels in this situation. And then we also do this with the Spotify New Music Friday. And here actually what we see is something interesting. We see opposite findings, right? So we, in the conditioning and observables approach, we observe that the majors are ranked too high, whereas in the outcome-based approach, the majors are ranked too low. Now a possible explanation for that is just that there's something unobserved that makes major labels pick up some songs and not others that we can't capture with the observables that we have. So here really we kind of think that the outcome-based test is doing much better than the conditioning and observables test. This, by the way, also confirms the general concerns we've had, as well as some Monte Carlo results. So with all of that, I just want to give a little more of a setup here for the structural approach to actually measure the welfare effects of potential self-preferencing. So again, we're going to go with Amazon because there's a potential for finding large effects, with the caveat that the data are not what we want them to be. Okay, so overall, what we can do is we can first estimate the demand function as a plain logit, nothing fancy, have some controls, and then plug in obtain the delta 0, the rank independent delta, and plug that into the supply function. With all of that, we estimate all of this. We find a causal rank effect that is at least the right direction with a fixed effects approach and so on. We plug this in. Oh, I see what happened. In an ideal world, you'll also see the supply table, but you won't because of things. But we find coefficients that suggest, well, a large coefficient on the platform product that suggests, again, there is a lot of self-preferencing. So what we can do is we can set that coefficient on the platform product equal to 0 to basically just eliminate the self-preferencing. And what we're showing here is just the distribution of rankings of Amazon products. The two lines that are close to each other show the truth and our modeled truth. And the line that is definitely different from the other two, that's the one that removes the self-preferencing, again, in this illustration, which basically just puts all of the Amazon products all the way at the end. Right? So then we can compare the welfare, the consumer surplus and producer surplus, both from the current rankings as well as from the de-biased rankings as well, and then any point on the welfare frontier as well. When we do this, we see the frontier over here, and we've got a de-bias point that's pretty close to the CS max. You can see that on the frontier, and a little further from the revenue max point. So they seem to maybe care about consumers, right? Now the bias point kind of forgoes a bunch of both the consumer surplus and also producer surplus. Again, just as a quick note, again, this is just illustrative. The data are not what we want them to be. Now, kind of moving on from this, though, you might have wondered, or I mentioned earlier on in this presentation, that we're presenting one possible definition of bias, right? We've got this definition that the platform wants to give its own product some preferential treatment. This is what we could call this naked self-preferencing. And in our definition, we basically said anything that was different from consumer surplus versus producer surplus would be that, as long as it's correlated with the platform dummy. Now, of course, we can think of other ways in which the in which we can deviate from that frontier, right? One would be maybe instead of producer surplus and consumer surplus only, they also care about their own commission, right? We in the presentation, for simplification, I set the consumer perfect. That's great. We set the marginal cost equal to 0, but in reality, there's something they can care about producer surplus, including the marginal cost. They can also just care about the commission, which would mean they would care about their own revenue. And then we can care about consumers, right? Now, if we were to add this component where we really just said, what is the, like allow them to care differently for producer surplus than for their own revenue, for their own commission, there's a question of, is this still illegal under the DMA? Well, it's, they're just maximizing profit, right? Now, in our framework, we can build this in. Again, this is just an illustration, but we can also have, we can plot the points that are, get us away from this frontier, either for just the naked bias or also for caring about their commissions rather than just sellers and producers, sellers and consumers. So that's just two different ways. You see the two arrows here that kind of get us to different points inside of the frontier. Again, this is just an illustration. We're working on that at the moment, or soon again, when the teaching's done, right? No, okay, but then also, right, where else can bias come from? There's one more thing. A third source could be something where maybe the platform cares about something yet different. That's not producer surplus, that's not consumer surplus or revenue. It can just be something like minimizing the returns or having star ratings or anything else, right? Now, if these are correlated with the platform dummy, a framework would basically pick that up as self-preferencing, but is this illegal under the DMA? So I just kind of wanted to put up a couple of questions for now. So our framework here, right? So clearly we need some ways to test for and evaluate this possible bias. Now, our paper presents one possible definition and also ways to test for and measure the welfare effects of any bias that we might find here. But we also want to kind of keep an eye open for other definitions here, just as food for thought for now. Yeah, data access, of course, is hard for outsiders, but we hope this is also helpful in general for regulators. So thank you for your time, and yeah.
Well, thank you for putting me in this or having me in this conference. This is a pretty related paper. I guess I can't see it. It's over there. Great. So DMA is here. This repeats a couple slides. I'll sort of repeat some things. Imke said self-preferencing is illegal, but really there is a question: what the heck is self-preferencing? I mean, it's as Imke was saying, it's not really that clear how to define it. She offered a definition, but also at the end, if you notice, said, if you think about a bunch of things that are plausibly worth worrying about, it's more complicated. So there should have been a slide that said it's complicated, like the Facebook. No, that's not. We talked about that, but she thought it was a bad idea. Okay, anyway, so what is self-preferencing? We have this urgent need. This kind of recaps what Imke talked about. But one thing I want to say in addition is, there had been some optimism that the Europeans would make platform data available to researchers to study these questions. But of course, it turns out that that's a DSA provision, not a DMA provision. And they don't consider, let's say, threats to consumers to be systemic risks to the European Union. I don't quite get that, but whatever. Okay, so there's a little bit of disappointment here about how readily we can implement any of this stuff, and rather, the Europeans will have to do it themselves inside of Brussels. Okay, but now to sort of get to this paper. So as Imke said, this idea of regressing search ranks on stuff and an Amazon dummy and interpreting the Amazon coefficient as a measure of self-preferencing is kind of a bad idea. It might be the best idea going, but it's kind of a bad idea. Because after all, Amazon basics or whatever, Amazon branded products may be appealing to people or unappealing to people over and above the characteristics that we can observe. So it seems like, although it may be the best thing going, it might be not such an attractive thing to do. But to get to what this paper does, here's like the idea. call this coefficient, the differential Amazon rank conditional on characteristics of products, call that thing alpha. Well, we don't really know what alpha means, but we don't think that the unobserved desirability of Amazon products changes abruptly over time. So suppose you took a page out of the Yogi Berra playbook that is observing a lot just by watching, and you just watched Amazon search ranks, let's say for a year, around the time the DMA was going into effect. What might you see? Maybe you'd see nothing, like put a telescope on a hill. Maybe you'll see something, maybe you won't. But let's see what happens. Let's see what happens to this alpha coefficient over time in a period around the imposition of the DMA. Okay, so the data here are 8.7 million product search rankings. So what I did here, I took 100 common search terms. I found some list of common search terms somewhere from some articles on the web. And then I basically did searches on these terms once a week at 22 Amazon domains. And I got 150 search results for each search. Okay, I did it weekly from June 2023 to March 2024. And then I've stopped analyzing data since then. So what did I get? So I have what you get from the search. I have some rudimentary characteristics of the product that I'll call X. I have price. I have the rating, the number of ratings, whether it's Prime eligible. I think a few more things I forget exactly. But then, of course, whether it's an Amazon product required a little bit of detective work because it doesn't always say, but there are a bunch of Amazon brands and there's a bunch of boring work done to try to figure out which indeed are the Amazon branded products. And by the way, one could do this not just about whether it's an Amazon product, but whether it's fulfilled by Amazon. I didn't do that, but one could do it for a variety of dimensions related to the potential for self-preferencing. So there are some complications that are, I think, worth mentioning. Over this time period, it's sort of well known, been publicly reported that Amazon was pulling back a bit from their house brand products. Right? You can see stories in the newspaper about Amazon pulling back. And so now that could itself be a response to the DMA. And in fact, I think it probably was, but that's not really what the paper's about. So instead, what I want to do to not mistake that strategy for what I'm studying is to consider only products that are available to be ranked. How do I know if a product is available to be ranked? If I see it again later appearing in the rankings, right? So if I restrict attention to those, then I'm not mistaking Amazon's withdrawal of a product totally for its differential tendency to either rank, include in the rank, or choose a rank. So I take this rolling window approach where I include a product J if it's appeared in the rankings in the past 30 days and will appear again within another 30. That means I lose 30 days at the beginning and the end of the sample. I could do it for 60, 90, whatever you like, but it doesn't really matter. Now, the problem with that, however, or the challenge that creates is that when I do that approach, I don't see the product's characteristics in the weeks in which it doesn't appear in the search rankings. So some things I'll do will be for the sample where I see you all the time, and some things I'll do will be for the other. But I'm trying to address the concern, the very real concern, because it's well known Amazon was pulling back apparently from Amazon branded products. So there are two outcomes of interest for me to study. One is the rank among ranked products. And again, be clear, we're talking about you put in a search, women's dresses, and then you get back 150 things. And I'm concerned with the rank ordering of those 150 things. That's when I say rank, that's what I mean. So one question is, what rank did the product get? The other question is, was it included in this first 3 pages of search results, the top 150? Okay. All right, so the sample character, I have 800, as I say, 8.7 million in the directly observed sample. The rolling window sample is bigger because I'm adding weeks to it. So that's like whatever, 12 million week by search by domain observations. But again, those I don't observe the characteristics in the weeks when you're not in. Just a first little fact, 1.5% or so are Amazon branded products. Right? It's not a huge number, right? You might say, oh, that's the answer. It's 0. We can go home now. But that's not quite the whole answer, I don't think. So a little bit of raw data that shows a lot of what it is that I can see here. The left-hand panel shows the ranks for Amazon and non-Amazon products, right? The ranks that appear. So what you see, the bottom line, the solid line, and I can't really read it at this point, but it goes from some number like 40, then it goes up to 50. 50 is worse than 40, right? You like to have a low rank. So Amazon products get worse ranks. That is, abruptly around October, Amazon goes from on average having ranks of 50 to having ranks of 40. The remaining products it just sort of goes along a pace. Now you might say one has to fall if the other rises, but remember, Amazon's not a huge share of the total. So this is sort of an interesting preview. The other picture is the propensity to be included in these first 3 pages of ranks. And Amazon products have a declining propensity to be included. So both things are happening, whereas the non-Amazon products have this sort of constant-ish propensity to be included. So that's, in some sense, that's going to be the answer, but I'll do a little more because I'm an economist. I need to bore you with stuff. So how am I going to measure this rank effect? There are a couple of ways, and there's a subtle distinction that's maybe interesting. So the first way I'll do it is I'll ask, do Amazon products have different rankings conditional on stuff? But what I'm doing here, this mu CST term, C is country, S is search term, T is week. This one is not looking within a particular ASIN. It's not asking the question, what happens to the rank of a particular Amazon standard identification number, but rather, what happens to the Amazon products that appear in the search? In a minute, I'll do the other one, but this is sort of, in some sense, the overall effect. So this alpha T depends on 2 things. There's a within product rank change, but there's also potentially a changed tendency for the product J or the ASIN to be included in the search results. So this one is going to conflate the both of them. And so if I do that, here's what the picture looks like in October 2023. Now, I mean, if I wanted to, I don't even want to say that this is an event study where I had in mind the naming of Amazon as the gatekeeper, because that would be sort of dishonest, all right? And besides, was anybody surprised that Amazon was designated as a gatekeeper? So I don't think of this as an event study. Rather, I've just been watching and showing you what happened. So I'm not going to use the language of that. But that said, what you do see is these rank differentials for Amazon are just going along at about -30, and then they go to about -15. So you have this 15-point change in the relative rankings of the Amazon products conditional on stuff. Now, the other thing, though, is to look within products. So this is literally the within ASIN change. So I said the overall was 15-ish. This part here is about 5-ish. So the within, so there's both a within ASIN change in the treatment of the products by the algorithm, as well as a change that arises from whether you get, whether you appear among the top 150. Okay, now I can do the same things for ranking inclusion. And so you can sort of guess how this is going to look or how this is going to go. So the upper approach is the overall effect, and the bottom approach is within ASIN. They're both, substantial and about the same size. That is the propensity to be included. So clearly something happened. Something happened around October 2023. Now, another thing, so I have to worry about referees and stuff, so I've got to do stuff in advance. Now, what I can also do now is think about the censored models. So what do I mean? If a product's not dead, but it's not in the rankings, it's as if I know that its rank is worse than the worst rank that I see. And so I can sort of play that game and treat the product as being, worse than the worst observable rank. And so in some sense, I'm not going to be biased then. That said, I can't then include X's because I don't see the X's, but still, if you do this stuff, you see the same picture, take your glasses off, you see that those things jump. Something happened. Something happened, a change in the way Amazon ranked its own products conditional on stuff. Now, another question one might ask, is it just Amazon products? After all, maybe there was just some change in the way Amazon was doing stuff, and maybe it affected everybody. So what I did is I found a bunch of commonly or frequently appearing brands in the data set, and I estimated these alphas by time separately for each of these different brands. And the one that I have and squared, is that a word? Not encircled, but the one that I have in the upper left is Amazon. And you see there's the change, and the others all don't have a change. So it looks rather Amazon specific. Something happened and it was Amazon specific. So you might even use the active voice. Amazon did something that affected Amazon. It's the same thing for inclusion. You see the same thing. Only it's only Amazon whose ranks or whose propensity to be included in the top 150 that are being affected here. Now, is this about DMA? So this picture that you can see right now is the Amazon effects in EU domains. I said I had 22 domains in the data set. I have the US, I have a bunch of EU domains, and I have a bunch of non-US, non-EU domains. And so here's some excitement. There's the EU. Whatever happened there. Whoops. Oh gosh, my animation's not working. Never trust anyone with your slides. Anyways, so the others look exactly the same. They look exactly the same. So in some sense, if the natural way to think of such a study is to think, oh, I'm going to test the treated part of the world, the EU, against the untreated part of the world, and I'll see if it happened there, and it didn't, but it happened everywhere. Now, that said, we all know that there's heightened antitrust scrutiny. The FTC sued Amazon in 2023. So it's unclear to me exactly what's going on. It seems to be a worldwide thing. Maybe it's a response to policy, maybe it's not, but it did happen. Whatever it is that I see happened everywhere, or at least all 22 domains. Okay, now just a little bit, mechanism is probably the wrong word here, but what this slide is showing you is the solid line is the frequency of Amazon products, where they appear in the rankings. And so you see there used to be a whole lot in the top 20-ish. That's the solid line. Then the other line below, which I guess is dashed, although my eyes are failing me, that there is a much lower propensity for Amazon products to appear at the head of the distribution. They've just disappeared out of the ranking, is what's happened. So most of the effect is operating through Amazon taking products out. A third of the effect is operating through Amazon changing the ranks of its own products among those that appear in the ranking. Okay. All right, so I have some additional notes I want to talk about in addition to my slide. But so one thing that's clearly true is that something happened. And something happened to Amazon self-preferencing as antitrust scrutiny grew. Although I want to say, I'm using the word self-preferencing, but it's not clear that Amazon was doing something inefficient before. In fact, all that's clear is that something changed. Like it could be that Amazon products were so much better that they had the right ranks before, and now they've responded in some sense, and now maybe they have the wrong ranks in a way that harms consumers. I don't know. I'm not saying that's true, but I'm just not saying I'm not trying to coyly say the opposite either. This kind of study cannot answer that question. That's what the point of Imke's presentation was. This kind of study can't answer that. Although what I can say is that something did happen to the extent of this thing called self-preferencing. And it operates through a reduction in the number of Amazon products appearing in the search rankings. And maybe it's a response to DMA and other pressures. But, a couple of things, I guess, that occur to me. One is maybe this is the effect of DMA, and sort of DMA already happened, and it already happened almost kind of before the DMA literally took effect, or shortly after, I'm not sure. It's also, it's clearly not true that Amazon can't control this. I mean, sometimes, I got yelled at by some Amazon employees and ex-employees about this couldn't be happening and it's not happening and we'd never do stuff, whatever. Okay, but obviously it did something. And I don't believe the smartest people on the planet can't understand how their own algorithms work. So I don't believe any of that. So clearly they can control it, and maybe policy had its effect already. But it's not even clear it was a good thing, though, which brings me last, back to the same thing Imke was saying. We need data, and we need a way to actually figure out if self-preferencing is a good thing or a bad thing. And sadly, data are hard, and the self-preferencing question is complicated. So there you have it. There's the good news and the bad news. Okay, I'm done ahead of time, I think.
I have a couple of questions, and then the audience should raise your hand. Someone's sitting there.
We're going to social distance, are we?
Okay. Oh, well, all right. Sorry. You're making me feel bad.
Okay, all right.
So I have just a question for you, Imke, that's more of a clarification question. You've got this weighted average of producer surplus and consumer surplus, and then a D, which is yet a third thing. Why isn't D part of producer surplus?
Oh, so the D is really just the platform dummy, right?
Yes.
It can be correlated with producer surplus, but the platform, we're kind of looking at this as separate from the sellers on the platform. So
I see. So
yeah.
the producer surplus, so this is a marketplace model.
Yes.
Sorry,
I should have made that much clearer. Yeah.
All right. So what that means is there's the consumers who are you and me buying stuff. Then there's the sellers who are Joe's cookies or Susie's necklaces or whatever, and they're selling things on Amazon. And then D is Amazon's surplus.
Yes. Thank you so much for asking that.
Although Amazon takes a fee from the producer, so in fact, that's not entirely
Yes,
correct?
yes, that's
Okay,
right.
All right, so
Mhm.
we all have to read the paper to get more details about that.
I mean, I
Okay,
can be a little more clear on that now as well, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so part of this is, yeah, so we're kind of thinking of this as, yeah, there's the sellers, exactly, there's the buyers. In the simplest world, maybe yeah, let's imagine a world with no marginal costs, maybe ebooks or something like that. Then in that case, and let's also imagine a world and maybe where the commissions are constant. In that case, the sellers, yeah, the producer surplus is perfectly aligned with the platform's incentives. And in that case, fine, great. If then in addition to that, even though the seller, the producer surplus and the platform incentives are perfectly aligned in theory, if the platform products get some some higher ranking anyway, in that case, that's clearly naked self-preferencing. If instead we have a world where maybe they get different commissions or anything like that, or or marginal costs are in a certain way, or they're or not non-zero. In that case, these incentives are already not entirely aligned. It's fine if we observe marginal costs, then it's easy to just build that in. If we don't, then we use IO to make them up. And we're all fine with that. Sorry, to estimate them. Yes. And yeah, but in that case, then of course things get a little harder. If the commissions are different, then seller and platform incentives aren't entirely aligned. And that in turn can already make us deviate from the frontier. Now, one definition would be that's bad. Another definition is that's the market. So.
Thank you. And then, Joel, your data set is retail and marketplace combined, the normal.
Just whatever you get
the-
when you
yeah,
search.
Yeah,
So,
which is both.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then I have a question about that. Could it be that, I mean, as you remarked, Amazon was widely reported to be looking at their own brand, and there were just a proliferation of them, dozens and dozens, and nobody seemed to have a plan for why they were there. So possibly somebody just took a look and said, let's profit maximize, and we have too many of these, we'll pull them out. And then somebody's been putting in a bump in the algorithm, and there's no reason for that. We're not making especially a lot of money off of these brands. We should take it out. And that was then a global change because it was sensible to do.
Could be.
Could be. Okay. Yeah.
Could be.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm not compensated by Amazon or anyone else.
Yeah. Or it's the Brussels effect where regulation in Europe was just rolled out everywhere because it's easier to do that than to run two different algorithms.
That seems very plausible because it's everywhere. It's in all 22 domains. So it doesn't seem responsive to a particular policy. It's not tailored to, Lena Khan in Brussels.
Right. Okay, great. Questions, Francesca?
License that you might be more exponential that you want to gain, but you can test, you can quantify. You have data from people about the quantity sold, you have the what you put on the money equivalent, how much.
Can you?
Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
It's okay. Just we'll go from here. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Perfect. And on top of this, in my understanding of the specific provisions regarding self-preferencing of the DMA, they are copy and paste of the remedies of the agreement between the Commission and Amazon. So of all companies that are gatekeepers, Amazon is the only one for which I would not be expecting significant changes in procedures, in internal algorithms, because they were already compliant, because they devised together with the Commission that. So this is why checking what Fiona said and with the quantities could be interesting. And for your joint paper, just one question, whether you are concerned about the fact that some of the observable characteristics that enter into the determination of the ranking are themselves linked to what Amazon provides the seller. A seller places a certain product in a certain market with a certain price because of what it learns from Amazon. So in a sense, Amazon can direct some of those characteristics.
Yeah, you take on that one. That's hard. I mean, like endogenous entry. Yeah.
Well, there's
characteristics.
there's also the sort of cumulative effect of past rankings, right? So if Amazon's been treating a product well, then it's going to be part of mean utility that the product is better, higher demand. So those are hard problems. But I mean, one thing, and I think this Imke said this pretty clearly. We started out thinking that we can just offer this definition, and it's a step forward. But the more features of reality you want to entertain, it becomes a little harder. Given especially data, it becomes much harder to estimate the model, and it becomes more like, well, we've almost come to the view that it's going to be very difficult. The European Commission, it's not as though they could use the version of our paper from 8 months ago and go regulate or test compliance, but rather it's going to be a hard problem for them. I mean, I don't know if I want to put words in your mouth, but I think it's really a mess, because if you think that products have differing marginal costs, which of course they do, and if commissions may differ across products, and that's not in any sense illegal, then all of a sudden it's very hard to say what constitutes. I mean, there are going to be welfare losses relative to what consumers and producers want, but they're not. Whether they're going to be illegal or even inconsistent with the DMA is kind of unclear. So it's
And just to add to that, I mean, so Joel is saying all of the reasons why just thinking about it statically is really hard. Now you're asking us to also think about it dynamically by thinking about what's going to enter. For now, I would probably say one step at a time. But of course, in general, I mean, of course there's, so now we're endogenizing seller prices. That's a good first step. Now also, in addition to that, thinking about endogenizing other seller attributes or seller entry. It's going to move us further away from the initial plan of the paper, which was to provide a simple way for people to maybe talk about what, is their self-preferencing and how bad is it? And it's going to be much larger. So there's a little bit of that trade-off as well of thinking about what do we want to do with this paper? Do we want to provide a simple way forward for regulators, or do we want to, how well do we want to model things?
And just one quick, just one quick thing is, I don't think maybe somebody in the room knows, but my sense is the regulators haven't given us guidance about what is self-preferencing. Like, the regulators could say, you know what? Amazon is the post office. It should rank products according to rank independent mean utility. Yep. And we're done. That's the answer. Then we have a framework. It's a simpler version of our framework. Or they could say, you should rank according to this, and you may not have, different commissions for different products. They could say that. They haven't. I mean, at Expedia, if you read the fine print, it says we get different commissions from different products, and we rank products differently according to the commission we get, which is pretty much saying, we're whatever.
Yeah. You're seeing the hotel that's paying us the most. Yeah, we're live streaming, Joel.
And so, so in some sense, there's a decision above our pay grade. The policymakers have to tell us what is self-preferencing.
So no, I need to stop you because what I was thinking as you were both talking, that you've slipped into the normal way that we think about US regulation and litigation, where the burden of proof is on the side of the government. In principle, under the DMA, Amazon has to show the commission that it's not self-preferencing. That's how the law is written. So I wonder if there's a paper to be written by you that says, well, if you're a regulator looking for proof, what would that be? Let's keep in mind that Amazon has all the data it wants and knows its own algorithm and knows when it made changes and so on. So that paper should be easy for them to write relative to you, for example.
That's a good point.
Not that they're smart, of course.
No, they're very smart.
More questions, yes.
Yeah. Hi.
Okay.
Great stuff. So I had maybe one question each. Joel, just clarifying question about how you went about the search process. Like, were there VPNs where you logged in? Because there's, tremendous personalization. So that would sort of shed light on, the generalizability. And, Imke, I think this is also related to the previous question that you mentioned something about sellers not being strategic, or you had some evidence, but it's like, there are sponsored listings and, anecdotally any further details on what you might have in the paper would be great to know.
So I got the data from, there's this interesting vendor called ASIN API. And ASIN API, you can just pay them to run searches for you. Now, unfortunately, you can't go back in time. So you have to subscribe in advance, and then you have to do searches. And so how are they logged in? I don't think they're logged in. So they're not getting customized. They're not getting customized searches. But you're right. It would be rather interesting to do this from 1,000 different people. That's, yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have a time machine. But I guess I could. No, I couldn't use a Wayback Machine.
Yeah, and to your question, so the thing exactly where I said maybe they don't seem to act very strategically. I was actually kind of piggybacking off of what Joel has in his data that shows, in addition to having these changes in rankings, he did look at the whether at that time Amazon's relative prices changed as well, and there was less evidence of that. That's where we went with the. So there doesn't seem to be much evidence of strategic pricing in that situation. Yeah, so that's what I meant on the slides there. Yeah, I mean, there's many other things, right? The sponsored searches where so far ignoring, of course, they, depending on how much people look at it or take that into account, we know that can also affect things. Now, the illustrations that we have with the data, we need to take with a grain of salt because of bigger data issues than thinking about sponsoring or spending money on sponsoring.
Yeah.
So 2 questions, one for each. Imke, you normalized the marginal cost at 0, which is like a totally reasonable thing to do for a first cut. But it does make me wonder, do we think Amazon on average on its own sales makes a lot of margin so that it actually has an incentive to self-preference? Because we also know that Amazon charges very high commissions and in fact increasing commissions. Maybe the ideal thing is to not self-preference if you're trying to profit maximize. And then one question for Joel, how should we think about entry in your context, right? You said like a lot of Amazon products exited. You would think that would spur entry by other products and that might reshuffle the rankings. I don't know why it would necessarily lower the rankings of Amazon products, but if those new entrants are high quality, it might.
I can take exactly. We'll go in chronological order of questions, I guess. Yeah, that's right, of course. So the setting that we have with the Amazon is ebooks. They don't necessarily have marginal costs, so that's a nice way to kind of get around that in this situation. But you're right. In the example that I brought while we were sitting here with like 0 costs and equal commission, then everything's fine as well. So of course, with a higher marginal costs. Then if the commissions are proportionate to the variable profit, we're still fine. If not, then I'll get back to what Fiona was saying. Well, actually, Amazon has all of these data. We don't. Really hard for us to do. But those things would be easy to build in if you had the data.
Entry is a neat idea. I think that I strongly doubt that in this immediate period we have this abrupt jump that we're seeing a bunch of entry. But that said, I think the idea that Amazon is changing the extent to which it's featuring its own products should change entry conditions. So that's I think an interesting separate thing to look at. And in fact, I could look at it with data on my hard drive. So I'll do that. Thank you.
Hi here.
Sorry, Ginger, then Laura,
yeah.
and then we might be out of time.
Yeah, I have seen both papers presented multiple times, but every time you
sorry.
inspire me to new questions. Here are some new questions. The first one is to Joe. As you mentioned that Amazon has withdrawn some of the private label products. I get your point that you focus on those that still stay, but even for those that stay, let's say in the category they had 2 private labels, but they withdraw 1. I think the 1 remaining may still be affected by the withdrawal decision itself in terms of ranking and other things. So this might be easy to fix. You just focus on the categories where there's no withdrawal.
So, but why would it affect the other product that's not withdrawn?
Well, because the choice set for ranking is changing, right? Let's say previously there are people looking for Amazon products and there are 2 brands they sort of divert their preference, but now 1 is disappearing and there's still some preference for Amazon products, and that may sort of boost the remaining products ranking or whatever, right? It's just because of the spillovers in the competition, I guess.
Yeah, we should talk about this offline. Seems like that would go the other way, wouldn't it?
Delta's not changing.
Yeah. No.
It could be, yeah.
I mean, it could be that, look, they're just they only have a few left, so they're not going to feature them. It's like, so we won't feature them because we can't really deliver them. I don't know. But yeah, it could be something like that.
Yeah, we can talk offline.
Yeah,
I think this is an econometric question. My second question is probably more on the conceptual level, I think both of your papers show some heterogeneity in the measures of self-preferencing, right? So let's say take Joe's paper. Before the DMA, it seems like they had self-preferencing. Some Amazon product was ranked non-deservingly in the high.
But your words, not mine.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm just saying hypothetically. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say hypothetically we interpret your result or someone interpret results as before this were some self-pressing. I can imagine there's some consumer harm. Say, okay, I have to dig deeper in order to find the products that I want to get, right? But on the other hand, let's say after this, it's the reverse. That's they depress it too much. Okay. And then you can imagine there will be other consumer harms that they actually want to
absolutely.
find.
I
Amazon
tried to say that
products
I
couldn't.
agree with you completely. I mean, Chiara and co-authors have a neat paper in which they implement our self-preferencing test, and they find no evidence of self-preferencing, despite the fact that Amazon has better ranks. And so it's entirely possible that Amazon was appropriately using differential ranks for its wonderful Amazon Basic products, and in sort of pseudo genuflect compliance to regulators, it's made life worse for consumers. It's possible, right? So I entirely agree with you. I think I can't answer that at all. And the work with IMCA is trying to develop a way to it, but it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. But my question is, like, when you have such a heterogeneity, like where the line is, are you saying that's okay? Just something with self-referencing is bad, but we don't care the other way? That's
no. I mean, that's his answer. He doesn't have a welfare answer yet. Yeah. But I want to try to get in.
Just a very quick question for Joel. So access to data under Article 610, you can become an authorized third party via a business user to get access, as far as I know. And to what extent this is actually working, I'm not sure, but that's my understanding at least.
Let's talk in the coffee break.
Hi, folks. I had a question about how, things that fall into the definition of self-preferencing, because the thing I was thinking about is, your initial setup assumes that what users want, their preferences are known. And part of how platforms discover user preferences is that they, particularly for new products, they put them much higher in the ranking than they might otherwise be as a way of getting signal. And I can see an argument that things like that, things around changing prices to understand consumer demand, there's a version of that is really something that only benefits Amazon and maybe is self-preferencing in a business kind of understanding of that. And then there's another version of that that's just, how you run a business. And I'm curious how you think about those kinds of those kind of other business goals that affect price as users experience them, but are not directly related to user preference at the moment that it's known.
Yeah. I like that idea. So part of this, okay, so at first I was thinking exactly, so one potential incentive or objective for Amazon is something that's not consumer surplus, that's not seller surplus, right? And so you're saying this one dimension could be new products up front. In the way that we're setting this up, or that we have set it up so far, just putting new products up front or something to learn about preferences for these products. Well, in our setting, this would not show up as self-preferencing unless Amazon products tend to be newer than non-Amazon products. If they are, then the setup that I presented, that I suggested, or that we suggested, would say this is self-preferencing. Now you're also actually saying, well, it could just be something like self-preferencing or giving yourself an advantage to just learn more by getting more information. That's really, yeah, that can't be captured in the model that we have in mind, right? But it's another way to think about self-preferencing, yeah.
Can I just say one quick thing about it? So in a different context, at Spotify, so Spotify is a little different because they care a lot about whom they're paying. Their money they pay to the major record labels, they pay higher royalties per song or per stream than they do to independent record labels. So now they have an interesting problem because they have 1 million songs entering the platform every year. It would be of interest to them to discover low-cost music that consumers like. And so I think they are actively engaged in experimentation to discover low-cost music that they can use, substitute for high cost music. So it's sort of this interested development of high value products that is doesn't just arrive. And so, but I think in the Amazon context, more generally, the question is somebody has to do some investment to make a product appealing to people. And it could be the platform, it could be it could be the products themselves by buying sponsored listings or doing other things. So no, but it's an interesting question because it's not clear that just you release a good product and then it gets ranked correctly. You got to do something to make people want it, to make the algorithm then treat it well, I would suspect.
But I also would say if you're trying to find low-cost music that people like, that's not self-preferencing.
Oh, no, I didn't say
somehow
no, it's not
but I mean, just responding to
Yeah.
the theme, that's expanding the pie of social welfare. You have to split it at some point.
The
But
major record labels disagree, but I think you're right.
okay, we have another question. Yes.
Two questions. First, to Joel, in rankings for search, we have so many sponsored products on Amazon. How did you deal with that? And I think more conceptually, to both of you, if you read the text of Article 6.5, there's no reference of consumer welfare or producer welfare in it. It's just don't rank more highly than similar quote unquote products. While I agree with high consumer surplus and high producer surplus being something good socially, how do we reason that that should be included in the enforcement of Article 6.5?
So that's a super interesting question because it suggests that what we call the dumb approach is actually what the lawmakers have in mind. It's good news. We can all go home.
So you mean ranking by delta?
Just conditional on stuff.
Yeah.
So the lawmakers didn't say which stuff, but they said maybe enough that you could say, look, this is compliant with what the language of the law. That's actually a really good point. Maybe that's what that's all the lawmakers have in mind. That would be maybe a bad law, but it may be the best law that can be enforced. So it might
right, because you can measure that.
Yeah, exactly. It's a conceptually bad law, but a practically good one, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The first, you didn't answer the first.
Oh, sorry. What was the first question? Oh, sponsored. I had a sponsored dummy. Sorry, I didn't say that. So I at least I conditioned. I let sponsored have its own coefficient, and indeed, sponsored products get better ranks than they otherwise would. That's why they paid.
Joel, your Spotify comments made me wonder about this even more as I was sitting here, which is the extent to which this framework generalizes to bias, like more generally, not just self-preferencing. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Like, is this an approach that you could use to study bias in general?
I mean, I don't know. So the thing I think about is that we live in this world right now. On the one hand, we talk about these platforms as being big, scary monsters. On the other hand, it's never been a better time in some sense to be a producer because you don't need to convince Macy's to carry you. Amazon has literally infinite shelf space. And so you can get direct to consumer distribution, any product. Now, the question is, how do you become known to consumers? So either it's their experimentation to discover you or you bribe them or whatever, I don't know. And I don't even know what's bias in this context, but in some ways, we're living in this absolute golden age for being a direct-to-consumer retail or producer.
But I think a shorter answer is you have a dummy for Amazon brand. You could pick any characteristic you were worried about. It comes from California. It comes from somebody with the last name of a certain type or whatever, and study that. Yeah. So I think it's a general method. Is that fair?
I guess so.
claim?
And 5% of them would be accidentally significant.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. So sure, there's infinite shelf space, but some of that is like in the, bottom tier of the basement and, the attic. So to what extent did you consider, there is infinite, but have you looked at how user behavior on Amazon works? For example, how many it's infinite scroll, but like how many go beyond 10 or 20 or whatever, kind of like we know with Google search that 90% of people never go beyond the first page. It feels like that might be an important factor. And is that considered in your analysis?
So I'm talking beyond the Amazon stuff right now. I mean, the example I know that speaks to that question is if you think about media products, you think about music, movies, books, things like that. There are nowadays a large fraction of the ultimately successful products are products that would never have succeeded 20 years ago. That is, books that start life as self-published, Imke and I have studied, independent label music. This stuff would never have been more than 5–10% of the market, and it is now 30% of the market. And it's somehow it gets discovered. There's a bit of a black box there. I think at Spotify, there's active attempts to discover this indie stuff. You know, at Amazon, there's Kindle Direct Publishing, and some books get, or not randomly, some books get successful and then they get republished by Amazon. Or so there's a lot, I mean, certainly there's a lot of injustice in that world, but there's a shocking amount of kind of democratization and success by ex-ante products from ex-ante actors who would never have been successful 20 years ago. Oh, yeah, well, yeah.
For example.
Well, I mean, I think it's, well, but the women are more than 50% of book authors, but I think that was even a pre-digital phenomenon. I think that's been going on since the 70s. So I think it's more the discovery of books. Well, I don't want to call it mommy porn, but you know, the 50 Shades of Grey, right? This is the best-selling book of all time or something. And this started life as self-published fan fiction, Twilight fan fiction, and then gets republished and you know, it's an enormous big seller. And the traditional publishers didn't regard this as worthy of their attention because it's like smut. But now they realize there's a big market for this stuff. And so anyways.
Okay. Yes.
Hi, thanks. Yeah. So I think final question.
Who was supposed to be supposed to be the moderator of this?
But Georgetown closed the daycare for whatever reason.
What a deep bench you have. You're number 3. Oh my gosh.
So yeah, back. So I wanted to build on Fiona's first question, and actually the question I was going to ask you in the panel. So these are papers that have everything that I love about an econ paper and everything that I hate about an econ paper, because they have like pretty much they have immediate policy relevance, right? You're writing a paper for policy implications, but you basically don't have anything about policy. Like, isn't it the time that a paper like this is a major section on policy, on like what do we need to do in terms of data? What are the trade-offs between the dumb version and the non-dumb version? Like, DMA enforcers are totally overwhelmed. There's 80 people to police the whole market. Shouldn't we like step down from the ivory tower and try to help them instead of just throwing an idea and saying like, oh, here's a brilliant idea, or not? Just go figure it out on yourself in your, I don't know, between 10 p.m. and 12 p.m. You know,
there's a difference between supply and demand. Oh, we want the data. We want to help them, but it's hard to get the data.
No, but just having reflections on the paper about what would require to implement this. Why is this measure better than other measures out there? Like, I know maybe the NBR wouldn't allow you to put that. It will ask you to cut it, but you can just put an SSRN anyway and just say, okay, that's the non-gated version of our paper, and these are the reflections that we have on how to actually, why would this be a good idea for people to pick up in practice?
Director's cut.
Yeah.
Well, that seems like a very good place to close, because I think the answer to that is we hope you write those papers and those suggestions. And we can talk about all these topics more over some coffee. We have a break now. Thank you very much.